This podcast was brought to you by Meros Cryptocurrency. Meros is a cryptocurrency payment system that does what cryptocurrency originally intended to do. Be a practical and secure form of direct payment, Meros utilises the best of current technology in a powerful new way. It introduces a groundbreaking consensus mechanism called merit caching. This enables Meros to be both feeless and instant while maintaining the same level of integrity of traditional networks like Bitcoin. To find out how you can participate in the future of crypto payments, go to meroscrypto.io now.
Hello and welcome to State of the Project Meros September 2020 update. In this podcast, we discuss all the things that are happening during the development of Meros and I guess beyond as the project reaches mainnet and grows to mature to be the world-breaking cryptocurrency that we all know it will be. Shill. Anyway, my name is Cryptosi. I'm the host. I've been here for the last almost 2 years now, and invariably I've been joined by the enigmatic character known as Kayaba. Kayaba, how are you, sir?
I am doing great. Thanks for asking. It's always a pleasure to be here, and I'm excited for what we have to talk about.
Yes, well, this is going to be pretty much almost a one-topic podcast, as there has been some absolutely massive news. But before we get into the massive news and the one topic, it was brought to my attention by one of the guys within the Meros, I guess, team, as you will. Can I say the Meros team at this point, Kayaba?
I would say yes. When we talk about full-time developers, I'm unfortunately still the only developer, and it's actually something I've been working recently to fix. We've talked about the bounties I've posted before and how those have actually gotten some community members and how quite a few have popped up. Some for weeks on a time and contributed to the code base. It's something I'm immensely grateful for. But when we talk about a team, what I really like to refer to is all the people helping out with communications, marketing, just giving advice, talking about the economic side of things. Because as much as I love to code and as much as I love to focus cryptocurrency on code, cryptocurrency is more than code. It's a currency, and that has a lot of other aspects tied to it.
Yeah. So I'm going to give him a shout out. His name's Strontium, and he did suggest that due to how the community has been growing and interest within the project has been growing, I will take this time out just to say thank you to people for taking the time out of their schedules to listen to the podcasts, to put forward questions, which you can do in the Meros Discord, and just generally for being involved. We had quite a few people turn up and be involved in the previous test nets, even though they were developer only. There were actually some developers which turned up and were involved. So just to say thank you to you guys, and also don't feel shy if you listen to the podcast month in, month out. And I know at this point there are some people who are regular listeners. Don't feel shy. Bring yourself to Discord, announce yourself, just get to know each other, because it is becoming quite a decent sized community, I would say, at this point. And that's something that I guess people within the loosely named team like Strontium would like to foster. So on behalf of Strontium, and I may talk out of turn, but I'll say on behalf of Kayaba also, thank you for all your interest in the project. Is that fair to say, Kayaba?
Yeah, no, it's completely in turn, and I would definitely also like to call some appreciation over to Hort and Pedro, because they're also people who have greatly helped, as well as you, Cryptosi.
Thank you. Okay, so that's all those thank you and acceptance speeches out the way. Let's get the big news. Let's talk about the big news of this month. It's been actually really big news. I posted something on Reddit about this, and it got the most upvotes out of any topic I've ever posted. And I've posted stuff about PivX numerous times, and this one done even better. The big news is ASMR. So, Kayaba, without whispering, could you please tell me what ASMR is? What does it stand for? Let's start with that.
So the more traditional response has to do with whispering in YouTube, but no, that's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about here is a project we recently published that refers to atomic swaps on Meros. So atomic swaps are fascinating just because They securely allow people to exchange cryptocurrencies between chains with full security. If you keep up your end of the protocol, so atomic swaps, there's a whole process that's done that's just referred to as the protocol. So as we talk about it, if you follow your steps, if you have a program that correctly handles it, because obviously this is automated, but if you have a program that performs the checks at every step and, remains online to actually publish the transactions, you are guaranteed to either get your funds back or get the funds that you're exchanging them for. It's completely guaranteed that one of the two events will happen. And that's why they're known as atomic. When we talk about things being atomic, that's what it's referring to. It's either one way or it's another way. There's no in-between state where you lose out. So these are fascinating not only because they allow exchanging two different coins, as I said, or in the case of Ethereum, you can also do it with tokens. But beyond that, they also allow connecting two chains securely because neither chain actually knows about each other, and yet they're still able to interact. And this interoperability is the foundation of DEXs and more. DEXs being decentralized exchanges, of course. Going to try to keep my acronyms down to a minimum here. So the great thing about ASMR, again referring to atomic swaps on Meros, is the project we built. It was actually built with this great developer known as Plasma Power, and he is most known in the Nano community for his work on Nano. And to be clear, he's not part of the Meros team. He's someone I've tried to get involved multiple times, and he's someone who's given a lot of feedback and someone I respect very much, and who Meros definitely has to thank a lot. That said, I don't want to brand him as a team member because due to his personal requests, he wants to make it clear that he's just someone who appreciates technology and he's not actually part of our project. That said, I did partner with him on making ASMR. And one of the things we did is we took the internal design and we made it immensely abstracted. And by this, I mean, you can add other cryptocurrencies to it. So the reason ASMR is so revolutionary is because it uses a new atomic swap protocol actually developed by the Monero community, specifically an author known as Hashed. And previously, atomic swaps with Meros were not considered, or Monero, sorry, were not considered possible because Monero doesn't have scripts. Generally, when we talk about atomic swaps, the basic process requires two things: one, time locks, and two, being able to have a hash secret. So when you have a random secret, 32 bytes of data, whatever they are, and beyond these 32 bytes of data, you also have the hash for it. And this hash is what's published on the blockchain. And if you have whatever hashes to that hash, you can submit it onto the blockchain and actually claim the funds. So this means as you perform the swap, one side generates a secret and they lock it to that hash. And then the other side does the same, locking it to the same hash despite not knowing the secret. When the party who created the secret goes to claim the funds on the other blockchain, they have to reveal the secret. And when they reveal the secret, you can then use that secret to claim the funds on the other side. So if they want to claim the funds, they have to reveal the secret. And if you want to claim the funds, you have to wait for them to reveal the secret. And the secret is either revealed or not. If it is revealed, you both get the funds. If it's not, you can take advantage of the time lock and reclaim the funds. So that's kind of the overall view of it. And Monero has time locks, but it's not that if the time lock expires, someone else can claim it. It's always to that key. It's just when there's a time lock, there's a delay between when it can be claimed. So atomic swaps on Monero weren't previously considered possible, but recently Hashed, funded by the Monero community, created a brand new protocol that only requires Monero to use a specific key. So on Monero, it completely appears as a standard transaction with nothing special about it at all. But it uses a more complicated set of Bitcoin transactions which compensate. So it's an asymmetric protocol.
When you say that Hashed, and this is the first time I've actually heard you pronounce it, because I've always read it as Hashhead. When you say that Hashed wrote the protocol, did he write the protocol, or did you write the protocol? Because at that point, that's where there's a little bit of confusion. Who wrote the protocol, and how could you explain that in a little more depth?
So the protocol uses a few pieces of cryptography that haven't really made it into the cryptocurrency space yet. And these few pieces of cryptography were not developed by Hash. They were developed by various parties. One of them has been around theoretically for a while, and the specific implementation was done by another Monero developer known as Sarang, Sarang. I may be mispronouncing that one. And then there's this other piece of cryptography used known as adapter signatures, which are really the key behind this, the most important part of it, in my opinion. And adapter signatures were published a few months ago by someone not associated with Monero, if I recall correctly. And what Hatch did is he wrote a series of Bitcoin scripts and transactions and actually detailed how the pieces can all fit together. And when he detailed this, he wrote, according to the Bitcoin blockchain and according to the Monero blockchain, what the protocol is. That said, he did not provide an implementation, and ASMR is actually the first implementation of this protocol. And as part of this, you have to transmit data outside of the blockchain. You can't just magically know who the other party is, what they're doing, so on and so on. So although he specified the Bitcoin transactions and when the pieces of data have to actually flow, we wrote the implementation and we actually wrote the network messages that communicate between each other. That said, the network messages really isn't the significant part of this. What our main contribution is the actual implementation in the test suite we wrote to verify the security of this.
Right. So when I put this forward on Reddit, there was a massive response. To be clear, on Reddit, there is a R cryptocurrency and then there's an R crypto technology, I think it's called. I didn't put it in the R cryptocurrency because that's generally just full of moon boys and I hate it there. I put it in the R technology, which seems to be not about the price of things. It does seem to be more about the technology, and people loved it. So one of the questions that I got, which was a question I guess I immediately asked, was, does this mean that we will now see atomic swaps being able to be carried out at the speed of Meros and with the privacy that Monero has? How does that work out if you're trading between, let's say, Meros and Bitcoin? Can you do it instantly? Or if you're doing between Monero and Bitcoin, can you do it with Monero level privacy?
So before I jump into that, I kind of want to wrap up what I was previously saying about the protocol being written for Monero and the internal design being heavily abstracted.
Right.
So what this means is even though we built the atomic swap tool to work with Meros, and the first swap we did with it was on Meros, and we actually have done that. We have conducted atomic swaps between Bitcoin and Meros at this point in time, which is very exciting. The inside of it, there's definitely Meros code. I'm not just going to say it magically knows the Meros protocol. No, there's a set of Meros files. That said, we actually wrote it so at runtime, you can select a different coin. So instead of Bitcoin, you could theoretically select Ethereum if someone wrote the Ethereum code. And instead of Meros, you could select Monero, or you could even select Nano. Because despite the protocol being written for Monero, it's viable on a variety of coins. So there's actually a Monero branch that's actively being developed by me. And then Plasma, the Nano developer I talked about earlier, and a very close friend of mine and someone I immensely respect, he is actively working on a Nano implementation. So this actually has a lot of larger ramifications for the overall cryptocurrency space.
Right.
So
okay.
When it comes to speed, this is unfortunately limited to the speed of the slower cryptocurrency. So while Monero, Meros, and Nano, they only have a single transaction, and it's identical to any other transaction on the network, there has to be a series of Bitcoin transactions to compensate for the lack of functionality in these other coins. And they all have this lack of functionality for a reason. I'm not trying to trash on any coin, especially not Meros. Monero does it due to the privacy reasons. Nano does it for simplicity by not having a scripting system. They enable much faster transactions. I personally think Bitcoin's scripting system, despite how it's enabled Bitcoin to stay relevant, via the Lightning Network and so on, I think the best path to enable a cryptocurrency is network upgrades that actually improve the cryptocurrency itself instead of outsourcing. So Bitcoin's scripting system, of course, enables that outsourcing, but I believe a cryptocurrency should be simpler, and the lack of a scripting system enables much faster transactions, which is why Meros and Nano don't have it. So unfortunately, due to a series of Bitcoin transactions being required and those transactions having to actually be confirmed, securely performed, it is limited to the speed of Bitcoin. That said, when we talk about privacy, there's actually a lot of interesting aspects here. So because the Monero transaction appears exactly the same, it has the Monero privacy on the Monero side. It's not like that data is published to Bitcoin. That said, there's still one party depositing the Bitcoin and one party receiving the Bitcoin. So when you deposit the Bitcoin, you can clearly identify they're doing an atomic swap with this protocol, but you can't identify what coin they're doing it with. So, well, of course, this is generally going to be used by Monero, so that's a safe assumption. If this achieves adoption within Meros and Nano, all you know is it's going to be one of the three chains. But from there, you can filter, you can look at timestamps, look at when matching transactions occurred. But all of these cryptocurrencies are planned to have plenty of transactions at once, and Monero actively does, and Nano actively does. And because they look like standard transactions, you can't really figure it out. So you know 2 Bitcoin people are doing an atomic swap with this protocol, and there's implementations from Monero, Meros, and Nano, but you don't know which it's being done with. So because of that, you can't actually link it to any of those coins or parties on those coins. That said, you can clearly identify who bought Meros, Nano, or Monero, and you can verify you can't see who received it. So depending on centralized exchanges and how that Bitcoin and Monero is used with centralized exchanges, there is a linkability concern.
I guess that could be mitigated. I'm thinking out loud now, so if I'm going on the wrong track, don't embarrass me too much. But I guess that could be, the word escapes me, but I guess that could be mitigated by having, what's the word? So say you kind of encourage people when they're doing atomic swaps, let's say between Monero and Bitcoin, that they do it in chunks of either 10s, 20s, 50s. So that way you've got not quite fungibility, but you've got something that kind of more masks the amounts that are being exchanged, so that chain analysis is not so easy. Is that something that possibly Monero people could look into when they're developing their own versions of these atomic swaps? So
even though ASMR works with Monero theoretically, the actual Monero support is actively being developed by me. Hash has announced that he wants to do his own, and ASMR truly is a proof of concept. It's definitely something I want to expand into an app to enable early on the days of Meros secure trading with Bitcoin, but it isn't something that's been audited or reviewed, and there would be a lot more work required to do that. So I'm actually excited to see how Monero expands on it, creates an app, and I'm also interested to see how DEXs, based on atomic swaps, how they integrate this, because a lot of them, they're not going to be looking for an independent app. They could outsource to us as a library, because despite being a proof of concept that actually has a main file that actually, you can run it on its own, is kind of built as a library. The main file just demonstrates how to use it. So I'm also interested to see how atomic swaps based DEXs do this. But sorry, I kind of lost my train of thought.
Right. So I was saying about Monero using predetermined. Yeah.
Right. So on the Bitcoin side, it's not really on the Monero side. It's on the Bitcoin side. There are definitely things you can do to make chain analysis harder. You can use standard amounts. You can go through stuff like Wasabi and so on. But as users of Monero know, and a lot of people should know, Bitcoin chain analysis is immensely feasible. Even when you talk about CoinJoin and atomic swaps and so on, it's not something that's difficult. If you outsource the transactions to a second layer like Lightning, because those transactions aren't actually archived on the blockchain, it's somewhat better, but Lightning's still completely transparent. All you have to do is wash Lightning just as you wash Bitcoin. And there's really no good way to accomplish privacy on Bitcoin, hence why Monero exists.
Right.
If we're talking about, say, something like Ethereum, there is a system there called Tornado Cash. And it actually does implement some privacy on Ethereum, and it's actually pretty good. You just deposit in, and then after a long period of time, you do deposit in a denomination, of course, like 5, 10, something, because that helps obfuscate it. If you deposit in 1.34 and later 1.34 is withdrawn, no, it's obvious.
Right.
So Tornado Cash is great for that. But you do have to deposit and withdraw it, and this enables something called a timing attack. If you deposit 5, and then 5 minutes later someone withdraws 5, right, you really have to have weeks or months, and then you have to pay the gas fees up front. So because you have to pay the gas fees up front, you do have to get Ether from somewhere, and that also has its own concerns. But Ethereum would be better prepared to handle privacy here. And this doesn't just work with Bitcoin. You can also do this with Ethereum. You can do it with Litecoin. You can do it with a variety of cryptocurrencies on either side.
So let's go back to talking about decentralized exchanges, because I am privy to you did have some discussions with BlockDX, which is a decentralized exchange that I'm personally pretty impressed with, pretty fond of. I'm going to go out on a limb and say possibly the most decentralized exchange that there is outside of Ethereum, let's say, outside of Ethereum only tokens. So for Bitcoin fork, would you agree with that? Do you think that's fair?
This podcast has been brought to you by Rhubarb Media. Rhubarb Media are the branding specialists behind successful crypto projects such as PivX, Vendible, and Libertaria. The Rhubarb style is both loved and respected the world over. So if you want your project to appeal to techies and everyday users alike, give Rhubarb Media a try. You cannot possibly be disappointed. Link is in the description.
So BlockTX is definitely, so first of all, I'm not really a fan of Ethereum dexes or EOS or whatever platform you want to talk about, just because they're limited to assets native to the network. You know, we're talking about 20s or CryptoKitties, you know, they have their own trading system. And as much as that's great for the platform itself, if you wanted to do something like Bitcoin, you need wrapped Bitcoin, and wrapped Bitcoin is centralized. There's actually this one project called Dogethereum. There's some horrible token that stole the name. Don't get me wrong. There's a very specific Dogethereum I'm referring to. And they managed to decentralize create Dogecoin on Ethereum. As in, you can lock up Doge on the Doge chain, and you can get an Ethereum token matching that. That said, it's not really feasible due to the fees involved, and there is still a centralized arbiter, and they lock in Ethereum matching the value, or lock in Ether matching the value. And when they lock in that Ether, if they end up running away with your Doge, you can use a penalty system securely. So it's still secure overall, but there's feasibility concerns. But really, when you talk about doing something like Bitcoin, it's just not viable. So because of that, I'm not really a fan of Ethereum dexes, just because of how limited they can be. But atomic swaps, even with Ethereum-based coins, those are secure. And that's when we get into quality projects like BlockTX. I will be honest and say I haven't researched the technology too much, so I am hesitant to make any real commentary. You know, I really try to be careful about what projects I say I like and don't like, because I really try to be a person who's transparent and who actually thinks about what they say. I'm sure a lot of developers like that. I'm not trying to call anyone out. So BlockTX and Bisq, they both seem like great pieces of the technology, and I actually have looked into Bisq more. And they're definitely groups I respect at this point in time. We've actually already reached out to BlockTX and talked about our implementation with them, as they're interested in it. And this opens up paths along BlockTX, which is very exciting.
So does this mean, or will this mean that finally, because I know this is quite a big deal for the Monero community and probably for the Nano community as well. I guess Meros community would be spoiled because I guess we'll get into that a bit later. But does this mean that this type of implementation will allow finally decentralized exchanges to add Nano and Monero, which were previously quite clearly absent? It was quite noticeable that you couldn't get Monero on these sorts of platforms. Does this mean that BlockTX finally can add Nano and Monero once these implementations have been tested, as you would say, audited, and all the other things that they should be done?
So yeah, BlockTX can definitely add Monero now, which is very exciting. There are complications though. So BlockTX, one of the things it says is any coin listed can be traded against any other coin, because atomic swaps enable that. That said, because this protocol is asymmetric, because there are extra requirements on it, because you have to have a very specific set of things done on Bitcoin, this isn't true. So Bitcoin, one of the features, which is hotly, it's very contentious. I'm not going to say otherwise. There's a Bitcoin Cash didn't enable this, and neither did Bitcoin Cash derivatives. It's called SegWit. And it's not really something I want to get into much here, but it is required for this atomic swap protocol, not because of the actual core of SegWit. It's not actually about how it handles data, but one of the great things actually that SegWit did is they solved transaction malleability. Whenever you create a Bitcoin transaction, any third party can step in and they can just slightly edit the Bitcoin transaction to be different. And if they did make it different in any sort of way, the person who locked Bitcoin could just flat out lose their Bitcoin, and that it would not be atomic. Well, it can still do it with a great degree of certainty. It cannot be atomic, and there's no way to predict all possible transaction variations. They're just too great.
Yeah.
So because of that, you do need something called SegWit, which means you're already limiting what you can swap with. So basically, BlockTX would have to start saying certain pairs don't exist. So that represents an infrastructure change, and the swap process becomes a lot more involved depending on what coins you do it. So it's not an easy task, but it definitely paves the way to exchanges like BlockDX. And then Komodo also has their own atomic swap exchange and so on.
Yes, okay.
So I would like to make a couple notes real quick.
Yep.
First of all, Monero has already been traded on Bisq for a while. It's actually been a great exchange according to the Monero community, and I believe it's the top cryptocurrency on Bisq. And this is because Bisq, despite being a decentralized exchange, doesn't use atomic swaps. They use a multi-sig-based system, which has worked with Monero for a long time, just because of the cryptography behind it being very established. There's also one other project that I hear a lot when we talk about decentralized exchanges. It's being pretty heavily shilled, called RenVM. And that has also supported Monero and so on because it also uses a multi-sig basis. But this is kind of off topic. I just have to say it, though. I am not a fan of RenVM. While the tech behind it has a lot of promising tech, right now, the people who actually create consensus for the network and actually execute the transfers of value, they actually participate in the multi-sig, it's 14 servers operated exclusively by the Ren team. And while no one person on their team has access to enough of the servers to make it problematic, and while they claim they're good secure, it's centralized. PayPal has multiple servers and not one employee has access to all their servers, probably. Maybe the CTO. And I'm not trying to say they can't improve. I'm excited for their improvements. I just want to say right now, I do not consider RenVM relevant to the decentralized exchange discussion rather than something to watch over.
Okay, so let's get back to Meros and ASMR. Development timelines. Will this type of atomic swap be available for Meros to be used at mainnet launch?
So as I said earlier, we actually have conducted atomic swaps with Meros, which is something I'm very happy to announce. And along that same path, as I said, we've done it with Meros. The trick is twofold. One, we actually have to have the app. It doesn't have to be audited to be used, but no, really, it does need a lot more review. And if we're going to build an app, we would have to attach a GUI, so on and so on. So there is more work that would have to be done there. But even once you have that done, you need to be able to coordinate these atomic swaps. You have to be able to say, hey, I'm looking to swap X for Y for this amount of value. And that's something that requires its own work. And I really don't want to build a DEX or a decentralized network to coordinate this. We can use Meros data transactions, which are pretty interesting to help out with this. And that's kind of taking advantage of the existing Meros network to coordinate. And that actually has a lot of promises behind it. It's just very promising to discuss. And it's something I'm actually would be pretty excited for. But it would take a lot of work. And based on the fact I don't want to build a full DEX, that does limit how easy it is to use. But it also means we're saving months on time and not opening up a lot of security issues. I truly do believe it's the right decision, especially as we're talking about this. We would likely be talking for the first couple of months before a centralized exchange or BlockDX or something similar picks us up. I'm not trying to say BlockDX listing confirmed. I'm definitively not saying that. I'm just saying we have enabled BlockDX support, and I have talked to BlockDX's team members about this, and we haven't really talked about Meros. I'm not trying to say, oh yeah, we're talks about a listing. I'm just saying I have made contacts over there, and it is something that I'm going to be interested to talk development with, and that can lead places.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Okay, so we can't at this point we can't make the major announcement that Meros and BlockDX have entered into a partnership,
completely
Tron style. Right. Okay.
So there is one other thing I want to talk about for timeline. This took a couple of weeks to work on, which means a couple of weeks that weren't being worked on Meros. And that theoretically means a couple of weeks that Meros has been delayed. But I'm happy to announce it's the opposite. Yeah. I personally believe atomic swaps are critical for a cryptocurrency to succeed. Despite planning on hard forking Meros, not explicitly hard forking, an actual hard fork would be very difficult thanks to how we handle consensus. But I do mean network upgrades. There's no fork because there isn't an actual split off, but it is, if you don't upgrade, you'll get left behind.
Yes.
So I completely believe in that. But despite that, I do have a personal policy that when Meros launches, it has to be viable. If I were to die the next day, if development was to completely cease, Meros as a cryptocurrency would still be able to survive for multiple years. I'm not saying, 100 years. I'm talking more about the scale of 3 to 5. And still actually be used. It's not something that if it doesn't get upgraded in 6 months, it's going to die off. It is something that will have viability on the scale of years. That's very important to me in creating a quality cryptocurrency. And I consider atomic swaps one of the features needed for that. So before this protocol was released, I was actually planning on adding atomic swap support to Meros via adding scripting. As I said earlier, I'm not a fan of scripting. It really just takes up time needed to process transactions, and it has a lot of problems. That said, I did want to enable a special type of transactions called lockboxes, which would execute something called Meros script, and this would enable atomic swaps, among other things. That said, thanks to the introduction of this protocol and a viable implementation of it, of course, it needs further security review. It's not user-friendly. I'm just saying it does work. Because of that, we don't have to implement lockboxes. It's something I definitely want to revisit in the future. We have the Meros improvement proposal system, and that definitely opens a way to discuss adding it, because it does enable a lot more, of course, theoretically. But because we now support atomic swaps, that's no longer a requirement, in my personal opinion, to add for mainnet. And because of that, we've probably actually saved a month off development. So while we took 2 extra weeks to create atomic swaps, we've also saved a month overall for a net of 2 weeks.
Yeah. Well, that's good news. Okay, last testnet, we discussed the last testnet in the last podcast. Everything was pretty good on that front. You did say that you was planning having another developer testnet before having a free-for-all, let's call it, free-for-all testnet, and then mainnet. When now, considering ASMR and all the traction that it's given the project, when do you plan on having the next testnet, and will it still be a developer testnet?
I am honestly considering the next testnet being the final testnet. With the way that things are going and with the features we have yet to implement, honestly, it's something I'm considering to be viable. Obviously, I'm not going to lighten up on security and start releasing code I don't feel is ready. I do believe in thorough testing, as we've discussed many times before, and as I've demonstrated many times before.
Yeah.
That said, it is... Sorry, I'm trying to think of the best way to want to phrase this. It is completely possible that the next testnet will be the last one, and our last testnet will not be a developer testnet. Anyone will be able to download binaries for Windows or Linux and continue. And it's something I'm very excited to be able to say.
Awesome.
Awesome. It's something I hope to have ready within a few months, as in 2 to 3 months from now, we will be able to have this final testnet. And it's honestly something I want to run for weeks. I'm not talking about 8 weeks. I'm talking more 3 to 4. But it's something I want to be able to thoroughly test and actually make sure that some of our longer term features work. For example, with Meros, we use RandomX. And one of the ways RandomX, which enables CPU-only mining, remains secure, is every few weeks they update what the hash is. So with RandomX, it executes small programs in what's effectively a virtual machine. I'm not talking about Windows, I'm just talking about its own internal system. Yeah. And this is used to maximize the amount of the CPU that's used, because then if you want to make an ASIC, you basically have to make a full CPU. And of course, it's not quite there. It is still using a percentage. But so anyways, one of the things that's used to create this VM is a seed. And this seed is then used to generate the actual programs combined with the input data. And this seed is supposed to be updated every 5 days, if I recall correctly. With Monero, it was 2,048 blocks with 2 minutes each, aka 500. Sorry, I'm just running through the math real quick in my head. Yeah, it is roughly 5 days. So as we talk about 5 days here, so every 5 days with Meros, we regenerate it. And this is actually interesting because of the complexities it offers. When we change up the hash algorithm like that, verifying proof of work suddenly becomes much more difficult because you have to use the right RandomX hash. And it's this interesting process, which we've actually recently solved and added test for. I'm very happy with the code I wrote for that. But that is one of the longer term features I want to test. And to do that, you have to run for at least 5 days. And it actually is something we tested in our last testnet and was able to verify, which was very exciting.
I feel like we could probably have an entire podcast on RandomX alone. It is quite an interesting feature of Meros. But I am cautious of our time, and we do always seem to go over our allotted 30-minute time slot.
Every minute we go over, our podcast just gets better and better. Truly, my favorite versions of our podcast are the ones that hit closer to 45 minutes. And I've said this before, said it again. We really, truly should just allot 45 minutes.
We should.
Talk about doing videos. We've talked about doing this before. Proper face cam, and I think that could be interesting. I could hold up some very quality drawings.
What we'll do, what we'll do is we'll make sure that before we get to mainnet, that we will move to 45-minute video-based podcast. Let's make ourselves that promise before we move to mainnet. 45-minute video-based podcast. But Kayaba,
now I have to get a haircut. I haven't gone in one since before Corona craziness.
or you can get a Meros cap, one of the two, maybe a bandana or something.
Well, I do kind of want to present my face. I will say I have very quality hair. Personal opinion, I personally like it.
Yeah, well, legend has it. Legend has it. Your hair is quite awesome. Is there anything else you wanted to discuss about Meros before we signed off for this September update?
So I'm just very happy with how the tech is progressing. I'm excited for these next few months, as we should rapidly see a lot of features going on. For the next couple of weeks, I may be a bit slow because I've had to pick up some contracts on the side. And it's nothing major. It's only going to be a few weeks of my time. I don't plan to go on a hiatus as long as last time. And I will be still working on Meros, just, half my time instead of all of my time, which is unfortunate. But I will have to say, you have yet to ask the question that you ask every single podcast.
Well, do you know what? I thought, because I'm looking at the question right now, and I thought I'm going to let you off this month because the ASMR news has been so big.
But this is the month I finally have an answer.
This
is the best month to ask it. This is the best month to ask it.
Okay, I'll tell you what. Let's have a little drum roll. See if I can put my sound engineer to put in a drum roll. So, Kayaba,
I tried to help out, get that real effect there.
Yeah, that was quite a poor drum roll. So, when can we expect? When can we expect the Meros mainnet?
I'm very happy to say that it should be ready by the end of the year. Full testing, full development, so on. Exactly, like at a point where I am happy to release it. I'm not cutting corners. Obviously, we're not implementing lockboxes anymore, but the reason I wanted to do that before mainnet was atomic swaps, which we now have. So I'm very happy to announce that it should be ready with complete testing by the end of the year.
So we're going to say there's a release date of the 31st of December 2020.
It may actually be released in the first half of January, just because even though it's ready, don't want to exactly launch over the holidays, just because that a lot of people will be busy, and I want to make sure that we allow people to set up nodes and really decentralize the network from the get-go. Obviously, I'm not saying we're going to have 1,000 nodes at launch, but it would be great to expand the network quickly and make sure we have tens to hundreds of servers. And of course, if we're talking hundreds, still less than 200. I would be happy if we just got close to 100, to be honest, within the first couple of weeks. So just between all the holiday season, it may extend into next year, but it should be ready by the end of this year.
Okay, perfect. Well, Kayaba, as always, it's been emotional. Thank you so much for your transparency and all the hard work that you're putting into Meros. It really is starting to take shape now. It's starting to really gather traction outside of the Meros community. Like I said, on Reddit, there was a real big swell of interest. What I will do, I will add, I'm just going to type this down now actually, I will add the link to the Reddit post that I made so that people can go and check that out, because there were some quite interesting questions there which I answered.
There was also a post made on the Nano subreddit by Plasma about the atomic swap tool, because again, it theoretically works for all three cryptocurrencies, and not only does it currently support Meros, but Monero and Nano are under active development, and that got a lot of traction there, and he did answer questions on that post as well.
Oh, awesome. Okay, right. So I'll search that out and I'll make sure I add that to the description below. So anybody who's made it this far, congratulations. You've reached the end. You can go and check out the posts on Reddit, and for once have some actual good content to read on Reddit, which doesn't happen very often. And Kayaba, thank you so much for joining me this month, and thank you for finally giving us a definitive release. Well, almost a definitive release date, but at least we know now. We know ballpark. Just taking into account the Christmas hangovers, of which I generally have a pretty big one every year. Thank you for your transparency. And to everybody listening, thank you again for listening. As I said at the top of the podcast, don't be shy, join the Meros Discord, follow us on Twitter, etc., etc. All the links will be in the description. So Kayaba, thank you very, very much.
Thank you. As always, it's been great to be here, and I'm very happy with what we've talked about and the results of Meros for the past month, as well as what's going to happen over the next month.
I'm looking forward to it. I really am.
This show is brought to you by PivX, private instant verified transactions. With its groundbreaking zero-coin staking and masternodes, PivX is the top privacy currency. Feel free to trade some on Binance or Bittrex. And for more information, go to www.pivex.org.